I was just a kid when I met Belle. 17 and full of those big, naive dreams you have in high school. She was 16, bright-eyed, and had this laugh that made you feel like the funniest guy in the world. We were inseparable. By the time we hit 4 years of dating, it felt like we were already married in spirit, so when I asked her to actually tie the knot, it was the easiest yes of my life. We got married young, me at 21, her at 20. But back then, that felt like the most natural thing in the world. People told us we were rushing it, that we had our whole lives ahead of us, but what did they know? Belle was everything to me. She was beautiful in this simple, effortless way. No fancy clothes or makeup, just Belle. She had this kindness about her that drew people in, made her the kind of person everyone liked. And I was the guy lucky enough to call her mine. We didn't have much, but we didn't care. She worked as a cashier at McDonald's, and I was a mechanic. It wasn't a big life, but we made it ours. Every night after work, we'd meet up, sometimes at the park, sometimes at a little diner where we'd split a milkshake like in some cheesy romance movie. We'd talk about the future, kids, and this cute little house we imagined with a swing set in the yard. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours, and it felt like enough. But life isn't always like the stories you build in your head. Little by little, things started to shift. Belle would come home late from work and look too drained to go for our walks. I figured it was just the job wearing her down. Being on your feet all day isn't easy, and I didn't want to add pressure. But then the late nights turned into excuses. I have to cover for someone. I'm not feeling well. Maybe tomorrow, Leo. I told myself not to overthink it, but it started to eat at me. I've never been the jealous type, not really, but Belle was always a little too comfortable around guys. It was one of those things that bothered me when we were dating but never enough to make an issue out of it. She'd joke with her co-workers, get a little too familiar, but I trusted her. Or maybe I just told myself I did. I decided we needed a reset. So I started planning this surprise vacation. I imagined it would help us get back to where we used to be. But before I could make it happen, life decided to throw me into the deep end. One Friday, some buddies convinced me to catch a movie. It was last minute, and I didn't bother telling Belle because I figured she was at work. Halfway through the movie, I went to grab some popcorn. That's when I saw her, or at least, someone who looked like her. Same dark hair, same way she played with the ends when she was nervous. But she wasn't alone. This older guy had his arm around her waist, like they were a couple. He looked like the kind of man who had money, designer watch, sleek suit, the whole package. It was like something out of a bad dream. My stomach twisted as I walked closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then she turned and I knew for sure, it was Belle. She looked at me like a deer in headlights, panicked and caught. Before I could even say anything, she blurted out, "I have to go," and ran out of the theater, leaving the guy looking just as confused as me. I stood there, the popcorn still in my hand, my world flipping upside down. This was Belle, the girl I married, the one I thought I'd build a life with. What was she doing here? Why was she with him? I couldn't think straight. When I got home, she was already there, sitting at the kitchen table like nothing had happened. But I couldn't just let it go. I asked her what she was doing at the theater, who the guy was, and why she ran. That's when it all came pouring out. She admitted she'd been seeing him for months. He was wealthy, older, and made her feel special in ways I apparently didn't anymore. The hardest part wasn't the affair itself, it was the lies. She'd quit her job weeks ago, but every time I thought she was at work, she was with him. I couldn't wrap my head around it. All those nights I'd waited up for her, imagining she was just tired from a long shift, she'd been lying straight to my face. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was the end of everything I thought we had. And the worst part? She didn't even try to defend herself. After Belle's confession, the air in the house felt suffocating. I sat there, staring at her, waiting for her to say something, anything, to make it make sense. She didn't even look sorry, just tired, like all of this was as exhausting for her as it was devastating for me. I asked her why. Why would she throw away everything we'd built? At first, she said nothing, just played with her hands like she was trying to find the right words. Then, like she was reciting some pre-planned excuse, she said it wasn't about me. He has money, Leo. He can give me things you can't, she explained. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. I thought love was enough. I thought we were enough. The worst part was hearing her talk about how he made her feel special. Like the life we had wasn't already special enough. Sure, we didn't have fancy vacations or expensive things, but wasn't love supposed to be more than that? I had worked so hard to build a life for us, to make her happy. I worked long days at the shop, but I always came home to her. I was never late, never distant. I thought I was a good husband. I asked her how long this had been going on. A few months, she admitted, her voice flat. She didn't even try to sugarcoat it. The timeline hit me like a brick. I thought back to all those nights she'd come home late, the excuses, the time she said she had to work extra shifts. Every single one of those moments was a lie. She didn't even have a job anymore. When I asked her about the guy, she shrugged, like he didn't matter. He's just someone I met, she said. Just someone. As if just someone could ruin a marriage. I pressed her, asking if she loved him. She shook her head quickly, almost too quickly, and told me it wasn't about love. That somehow made it worse. If she didn't love him, what did that say about us? I remember sitting there, my head spinning, trying to figure out what to do next. Do I fight for her? Do I forgive her? Every part of me wanted to fix it, to rewind time and go back to before this all happened. But the longer I sat there, the clearer it became that this wasn't something I could fix. She had made a choice, and it wasn't me. That night, I slept on the couch. Or at least I tried to. My mind wouldn't stop racing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him, his arm around her waist, the way she looked at me when she realized she'd been caught. I wanted to scream, to punch something to make the pain stop, but I just lay there in silence, the weight of it all crushing me. The next day, I told her we needed to talk. I needed to know if there was any chance we could come back from this, if she wanted to fix what we had. But when I sat her down and asked her, she didn't fight for us. She didn't even seem surprised when I told her I was thinking about leaving. Maybe that's for the best, she said, her voice quiet but steady. It felt like a slap in the face. I had spent years loving her, building a life with her, and she was willing to throw it all away so easily. I didn't pack my bags right away. I told myself I needed time to figure things out, but the truth was, I wasn't ready to walk away. As angry and hurt as I was, part of me still hoped she'd change her mind, that she'd beg me to stay, tell me she'd made a mistake. But that never happened. She kept going out, coming home late, acting like nothing had changed. It was like she'd already moved on, and I was just a ghost haunting the place we used to call home. The final straw came a week later. She got a text while we were sitting at the kitchen table. Her phone lit up with his name. It wasn't even hidden under a fake contact. She didn't bother to silence it, didn't even flinch when I looked at the screen. I asked her if she was still seeing him. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try to lie. That's when I knew it was over. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't going to change. That same night, I told her I was filing for divorce. Her reaction? A shrug, like it was inevitable, like she'd been expecting it all along. The next morning, I called a lawyer. After filing for divorce, I knew I couldn't keep living under the same roof with Belle. Every time I saw her, it was like pouring salt on an open wound. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the complete lack of remorse. She didn't apologize, didn't try to make amends. She acted like this was just how things went, as if I was supposed to quietly accept it. One evening, I came home and found her on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. I couldn't take it anymore. I told her she needed to leave. This wasn't her home anymore, not after everything she'd done. At first, she acted like she didn't hear me. She just kept scrolling, her face completely blank, like I was a buzzing fly she could swat away. When I repeated myself, she finally looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Are you serious?" she asked, her tone dripping with disbelief. "You can't just kick me out, Leo. This is my house too." I told her it wasn't her house anymore. She'd given that up the moment she started sneaking around with someone else. I wasn't going to keep playing the fool, sharing a home with a woman who clearly had no respect for me or our marriage. That's when the tantrum started. She jumped off the couch, throwing her phone onto the cushions like a petulant teenager. "You're being ridiculous," she shouted. "You think you're the victim here? Do you even realize how hard it's been for me? How unappreciated I've felt? This isn't just about you, Leo." Her words hit like slaps, but I didn't budge. I told her that whatever excuses she had didn't matter anymore. She could have talked to me, told me she was unhappy, but instead, she chose to lie and cheat. She didn't want to fix things, she wanted out, and now she had it. She stomped around the living room, grabbing random items and tossing them into a duffel bag, all while ranting about how unfair I was being. She accused me of overreacting, of being dramatic, of trying to ruin her life. At one point, she even tried to guilt me, saying I was throwing away everything we'd built together. "You don't get to act like you're the victim, Leo," she spat. "You're not perfect either." I almost laughed at the audacity of it. I told her I might not be perfect, but at least I'd been faithful. At least I'd tried to make our marriage work, even when things got tough. She had no right to stand there and pretend this was my fault. She packed as slowly as possible, dragging out the process like she was hoping I'd change my mind. When it became clear that I wasn't backing down, she grabbed her bag and stormed toward the door. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice cold. "You'll regret this, Leo. You're going to miss me when I'm gone." I told her that maybe I would, but I'd never miss the version of her who could betray me like this. With that, she slammed the door behind her, leaving me standing in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the silence she left behind. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The house felt different without her in it. Emptier, sure, but also lighter. It wasn't the kind of relief that felt good, but it was better than the constant tension of pretending everything was fine. That night, I sat on the couch she'd abandoned and stared at the walls. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a shell, full of memories that no longer meant anything. I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about everything she'd said, how she'd tried to twist it all around, make it about her, like I was the one who had done something wrong. But deep down, I knew this was the right thing to do. The next day, I started making changes. I gathered up all the things that reminded me of her. Photos, little trinkets, gifts she'd given me, and stuffed them into a box. I didn't throw them away, but I put them out of sight, somewhere I wouldn't have to see them every day. I also called my lawyer and told him Belle had moved out. He said that was a good step, that it would make the process smoother. It felt like progress, like I was taking control of my life again, piece by piece. But the emptiness lingered. Every time I walked into a room, I felt the weight of what had been lost. It wasn't just Belle I was grieving, it was the life we were supposed to have, the dreams we'd built together that now felt like lies. Belle's departure didn't magically fix everything. Sure, the house was quieter, but it wasn't peaceful. The silence had a way of amplifying my thoughts, forcing me to replay everything over and over in my head. I kept asking myself the same questions. How did I not see this coming? Was there something I could have done differently? Could I have saved us? But every time I tried to go down that road, I stopped myself. The truth was simple. Belle made her choice. She could have talked to me, told me she was unhappy, but instead, she lied, cheated, and walked out when things got tough. That wasn't on me. I started focusing on rebuilding my life, one step at a time. First, I made the house mine again. I rearranged the furniture, painted the walls, and threw out anything that felt too tied to her. It was cathartic in a way, like I was scrubbing her memory out of the space she'd left behind. I also threw myself into work. I started taking on extra shifts at the shop, fixing up cars late into the night. The physical labor helped keep my mind off things, and the money didn't hurt either. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me something to focus on, something to remind me that I was still capable, still strong. But there were reminders of her everywhere. Our mutual friends, the places we used to go, even random songs on the radio. They all felt like little daggers, cutting into the wounds I was trying so hard to heal. Every time I thought I was making progress, something would pull me back, and I'd feel like I was starting all over again. The hardest part was running into people who didn't know yet. A neighbor stopped me one morning, asking how Belle was doing. I froze, not sure how to answer. Do I tell them the truth? Do I pretend everything's fine? In the end, I just muttered something about her being busy and made an excuse to walk away. Word spread eventually. Small towns are like that. Once one person knows, everyone knows. People started giving me those pitying looks, the kind that made my skin crawl. Some of them tried to offer advice or sympathy, but most just gossiped behind my back. One day, I ran into one of Belle's old co-workers at the grocery store. She asked if I'd heard about Belle's new boyfriend, the rich guy she'd left me for. The way she said it, like it was common knowledge, made my blood boil. I hadn't asked for details, but apparently, everyone else was happy to share them. I didn't want to hear it, but she kept talking, saying how Belle had started showing up at fancy restaurants and shopping at high-end stores. It was like she was living a whole new life, one I'd never been a part of. That night, I sat in the dark, thinking about everything I'd learned. Belle wasn't just gone, she was thriving, or at least pretending to be. Meanwhile, I was here, still cleaning up the mess she left behind. But that realization lit a fire in me. I decided I wasn't going to let her win, wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. If she could move on, so could I. I started hitting the gym regularly. At first, it was just to blow off steam, but over time, it became something more. I signed up for boxing classes, something I'd always wanted to try but never got around to. There was something empowering about it, the way it forced me to focus, to push myself. It wasn't just about getting stronger, it was about proving to myself that I could handle whatever life threw at me. I also started exploring new hobbies. One day, I stumbled across a video about sneaker reselling and decided to give it a shot. I started small, buying and flipping a few pairs here and there, but it quickly became a passion. It was exciting, finding hidden gems and turning them into profit. The more I threw myself into these new ventures, the less space Belle took up in my mind. I still thought about her sometimes, of course. Some days, the pain felt fresh, like it had just happened. But other days, it felt like a distant memory, like a scar that no longer hurt when you touched it. I wasn't there yet, but I could see a future where I was happy again, where I wasn't defined by what she'd done to me. As the weeks went by, my life started to take on a new rhythm. It wasn't the same as before, not even close, but it was mine. I spent my mornings at the shop, my evenings at the gym, and my nights researching the sneaker market or cleaning up the house. Slowly, the weight of Belle's absence started to shift from something painful to something freeing. But moving on didn't come without its hurdles. Every once in a while, she'd find a way to disrupt my progress. The first time was a month after she moved out. I came home from work to find her sitting on the porch, arms crossed and looking annoyed. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I need to grab some of my things," she said, as if nothing was wrong, as if she hadn't thrown our life away. I told her that she could have called, but she just shrugged and said she didn't think she needed to. That was Belle, always assuming she could waltz back in whenever it suited her. She walked in like she still owned the place, looking around as if she expected everything to be just as she left it. When she saw the changes, the rearranged furniture, the new paint, her expression shifted. For a second, it looked like regret, but she quickly covered it with a smirk. "Making the place your bachelor pad already, huh?" she said, her tone mocking. I didn't take the bait. I told her to grab what she needed and leave. As she went through the house, collecting random things she'd left behind, she kept trying to needle me, making snide comments about how different everything felt. At one point, she stopped in front of a photo we'd taken on our wedding day, the one I hadn't had the heart to pack away yet. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" she asked, her voice softer than I expected. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to tell her exactly what I thought, that she was selfish, that she'd destroyed everything we'd built. But what was the point? It wouldn't change anything. So instead, I just said, "Not anymore," and walked out of the room. By the time she left, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Seeing her again, hearing her voice, it brought back all the anger and hurt I'd been working so hard to move past. But it also reminded me why I had to keep moving forward. That night, I went to the gym and threw everything I had into my workout. I stayed long after the others had left, punching the bag until my knuckles ached and sweat dripped into my eyes. It wasn't just about the anger, it was about proving to myself that I was stronger than this, stronger than her. Over time, I started to see the results of all the effort I'd been putting in. My body was leaner, stronger, and I felt more confident than I had in years. Even my work at the shop started to feel different. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. I was pushing myself, taking on harder jobs, and learning new skills. The sneaker reselling business was picking up, too. I started going to sneaker conventions, meeting other resellers, and networking with people who knew the industry inside and out. What started as a side hustle was turning into something real, something I could see myself doing full-time. And with every step forward, Belle's shadow grew smaller. I didn't think about her as much anymore. When people brought her up, I could shrug it off without feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Then, one day, I got a message from a mutual friend. Apparently, Belle's new relationship wasn't going as smoothly as she'd hoped. The rich guy? Turns out, he had a wandering eye, and she wasn't the only woman in his life. I thought it would make me happy, knowing she got a taste of her own medicine. But it didn't. If anything, it made me feel sorry for her. Not enough to reach out or let her back into my life. Just enough to remind me that I'd made the right decision in walking away. I wasn't the same guy I was when Belle left. I wasn't the heartbroken husband waiting for answers or hoping she'd come back. I was someone else now. Stronger, more focused, and ready to move on. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was starting to figure out who I really was. A few months after kicking Belle out, life had settled into a routine that felt solid. It wasn't perfect. Some days were harder than others, but I was starting to feel like myself again. Or maybe a new version of myself, one who didn't define his happiness by someone else's presence. The sneaker reselling business had taken off in a way I hadn't expected. What started as flipping a few pairs of Jordans online had turned into a legitimate operation. I'd built a small but loyal customer base, found suppliers who could hook me up with rare drops, and even started attending conventions to expand my network. Every pair I sold felt like a little victory, proof that I could build something on my own. I still worked at the shop, but I could see the writing on the wall. The sneakers weren't just a side hustle anymore, they were becoming my way out. I started dreaming about opening my own store, a place where sneakerheads could come to find the rarest kicks and talk shop. It felt ambitious, but for the first time in a long time, ambition didn't scare me. Meanwhile, I kept hitting the gym harder than ever. Boxing became more than just a way to blow off steam, it was my therapy, my outlet. My coach, an old school guy named Frank, started pushing me to enter amateur tournaments. At first, I laughed it off, but the idea stuck with me. Maybe stepping into the ring, facing off against an opponent, was exactly what I needed to prove to myself that I was back in control of my life. Of course, Belle wasn't completely out of the picture. Every now and then, she'd pop up like a ghost haunting my progress. One day, I got a call from her out of the blue. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "I just wanted to talk," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "It's been a while." I didn't have much to say, but I let her talk. She told me about how her new relationship had fallen apart, how the rich guy had turned out to be a mistake. She didn't apologize outright, but there was a hint of regret in her tone, like she was testing the waters to see if I'd let her back in. I didn't. I told her I was doing fine, that I didn't have time to rehash the past. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, and for a second, I almost felt bad. But then I remembered everything she'd put me through, the way she'd tossed our life aside without a second thought. "I hope you're doing okay," I said before hanging up. It wasn't forgiveness, not by a long shot, but it was closure. After that, I threw myself even deeper into my new life. I started saving up every penny I could, putting together a business plan for the sneaker store I dreamed of opening. The tournaments Frank talked me into became a regular thing, and every time I stepped into the ring, I felt a rush I hadn't felt in years. The first tournament I won was a small one. Nothing flashy, just a local gym event. But when the ref raised my hand in victory, it felt like I'd conquered more than just the guy standing across from me. It was a win against everything Belle had taken from me, proof that I could rebuild, that I was stronger than the pain she left behind. One night, after a particularly good day at work and an even better session at the gym, I sat down and thought about how far I'd come. My divorce felt like a lifetime ago, and the guy who had sat on that couch, devastated and lost, felt like a stranger. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. The house, once filled with memories of Belle, now felt like my space. The walls I'd painted, the furniture I'd rearranged, the little corner I'd set up to organize my sneakers, all of it felt like me. I started to realize that Belle's betrayal wasn't the end of my story. If anything, It was the spark that forced me to become the person I was always meant to be. For the first time in years, I looked in the mirror and liked what I saw. Not just physically, I'd put on muscle and gotten in the best shape of my life, but emotionally. I was confident, focused, and, most importantly, free. By the time a year had passed, my life felt like it had finally leveled out. The sneaker business had grown steadily, not massive, but stable. I'd started selling through a dedicated website, along with a small social media following that brought in regular customers. My garage became my makeshift warehouse, shelves stacked with boxes of rare kicks, each one a little investment. It wasn't enough to quit my day job yet, but the income was consistent. Every month, I saw the numbers creeping up. It gave me hope that someday soon, this thing I'd built with my own hands could become my full-time focus. The thought of walking away from the shop, from years of working on other people's cars, filled me with a mix of excitement and nerves. Outside of work, the gym had become my second home. Boxing wasn't just a hobby anymore, it was a lifestyle. I started showing up earlier and staying later, pushing myself harder with each session. Frank, my coach, noticed the change in me. He began introducing me to others at the gym, some of whom were regular competitors, while others were just there to stay in shape. Through those introductions, I found myself part of a little crew. We'd push each other, cheer each other on during sparring matches, and hang out after workouts. It was the kind of camaraderie I hadn't realized I was missing. One Friday evening, after an intense workout, I sat on a bench near the ring, catching my breath. That's when I saw her. She wasn't someone I'd noticed at the gym before, which was surprising because she was hard to miss. She had this effortless confidence about her, moving through the space like she belonged there. Her dark hair was tied up in a messy ponytail, and she wore a simple tank top and leggings. It wasn't the flashy kind of beauty that demanded attention. It was the kind that made you want to look twice. At first, I tried not to stare. I figured she was just another gym regular, probably out of my league anyway. But as the night went on, I found myself stealing glances in her direction. She wasn't just beautiful, she was strong. The way she handled the weights, the focus in her movements, it was impressive. New face, Frank said, noticing where my attention was. Maybe, I replied, trying to sound casual. You should introduce yourself, he said with a grin, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. I shook my head, laughing it off. I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. It wasn't about her. It was about me. I was still figuring out who I was, what I wanted. Jumping into something new felt premature, like I hadn't earned it yet. But as the night went on, I couldn't help but think about it. About her. About the idea that maybe, just maybe, my life didn't have to be all about work and training. When I left the gym that night, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Excitement, nerves, a tiny flicker of hope. I didn't know if I'd ever work up the courage to talk to her, but for the first time in a long time, I found myself looking forward to the possibility. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. Lighter, maybe. Like the world was starting to open up again, offering new paths I hadn't considered before. The gym had become more than just a place to train. It was where I felt alive, where I pushed myself, tested my limits, and started to feel like I was in control of my life again. But after seeing her, the woman who had caught my eye, there was a new energy in my routine. I kept my focus during training, but every now and then, I'd catch sight of her on the other side of the room. She was usually doing her own thing. Deadlifts, kettlebell swings, or some intense circuit that made me feel winded just watching. There was something magnetic about her, not just her looks but the way she carried herself, like she wasn't there for anyone's approval. I didn't make a move though. I wasn't even sure I wanted to. It felt too soon, like I was still finding my footing. But her presence sparked something in me, a reminder that life could be about more than just work and rebuilding. Meanwhile, my days were filled with sneakers and sparring. The business had hit a stride, and I started to get repeat customers. People would message me asking if I could find specific pairs, and I'd dig through my network to track them down. It felt good to be known for something, to have people recognize the effort I was putting in. One evening at the gym, after finishing my last set, Frank pulled me aside. "Leo, you're killing it out there," he said, nodding toward the ring. "Ever think about taking this to the next level?" I knew what he meant. He wanted me to start entering bigger tournaments, ones that could get my name out there. It was tempting, but part of me hesitated. Boxing had been my escape, my therapy. Turning it into something more felt like a risk. What if I wasn't good enough? "I'll think about it," I told him, and he gave me a knowing smile. As I walked back to the locker room, I saw her again. She was finishing up, wiping down her equipment. For a split second, our eyes met. She gave me a small, polite smile before going back to her routine. That tiny interaction stayed with me the rest of the night. I couldn't explain why. It wasn't like we'd exchanged words or even introduced ourselves. But it felt like a moment, a crack in the wall I'd been building around myself since Belle left. The next day, I found myself training harder than usual. It wasn't just about boxing or fitness anymore. It was about proving something to myself. Proving that I could let go of the past, that I could be someone different, someone better. By the end of the week, I'd made a decision. I was going to enter one of the bigger tournaments Frank had mentioned. I wasn't sure if I'd win, but that wasn't the point. It was about stepping out of my comfort zone, taking a chance on myself. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find the courage to say hello to her the next time our paths crossed. The decision to enter a bigger boxing tournament gave me a new sense of purpose. Training had always been about working through my frustrations, but now it was about proving something. To myself, to anyone who doubted me, and maybe even to the part of me that still carried a little of the old hurt from Belle. Frank was thrilled when I told him. "About time," he said, slapping me on the back with a grin. "You're ready, Leo. You've been ready." I threw myself into the preparation. My workouts became more focused, my diet stricter. Frank pushed me harder than ever, forcing me to spar with more experienced fighters and critiquing every move I made. It was grueling, but it felt good to have a goal, something concrete to aim for. The tournament was still a few weeks away, so I had time to prepare. But in between the punches and footwork drills, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I still didn't know her name, but every time I saw her at the gym, it was like the room got a little brighter. She had this energy about her, a quiet determination that reminded me of what I was trying to build in myself. One evening, I noticed she was working out near the heavy bags. She wasn't boxing, but her workout involved a lot of movement. Burpees, shadowboxing, some combination of cardio and strength that looked exhausting. I debated saying something, but the words got stuck in my throat. Frank must have noticed, because he leaned over and said, "You gonna stand there staring all night, or are you actually going to introduce yourself?" I laughed it off, shaking my head. "Not the right time," I muttered. But Frank wasn't having it. "Leo, you've been training like a beast. You're rebuilding your life from the ground up. You're ready for this, man." I didn't answer, but his words stuck with me. A few days later, she was back at the gym, this time working on the rowing machine. I was finishing up some bag work when she walked past me to grab her water bottle. Without really thinking, I nodded in her direction and said, "Hey, that's an intense routine you've got there." She looked up, surprised, but smiled. "Thanks. You don't look like you're slacking either," she said, gesturing toward the bag. It was a small exchange, barely a conversation, but it felt like a step forward. From then on, we'd exchange quick nods or small comments whenever we crossed paths. Nothing big, just little moments that made the gym feel a bit less like a grind and more like a place where life was starting to open up again. Meanwhile, the sneaker business continued to grow. I'd wake up early to pack orders, making runs to the post office before heading to work at the shop. My weekends were spent sourcing new inventory, going to meetups, and networking with other resellers. The more I worked, the more I realized that this wasn't just a side hustle anymore. It was my future. One night, as I sat in my living room surrounded by sneakers, I decided it was time to take the leap. I started looking for a small retail space, something affordable but with potential. It was a risk, but I felt ready. The guy who had been crushed by betrayal, who thought his life was over, was gone. In his place was someone who was rebuilding, piece by piece. As the tournament date approached, I trained harder than ever. The gym felt like my sanctuary, and every time I saw her there, it reminded me that there were still good things in the world, still reasons to move forward. The tournament was just days away, and the anticipation was building in my chest. I'd been training like my life depended on it. Sparring sessions, cardio drills, endless rounds on the bag. Frank pushed me harder than ever, making sure I was ready for anything that might come my way. But no matter how focused I tried to stay, she was still in the back of my mind. The gym had become our mutual space, and those small interactions, quick smiles, short conversations, felt like the start of something I hadn't dared to hope for in a long time. One evening, I finished a brutal round of sparring and was toweling off when I saw her near the free weights. She was wiping down a bench, her face flushed from her workout, and I realized this might be my last chance to say something before the tournament. I walked over, still catching my breath, and said, "Hey, I've seen you kill it in here the last few weeks. Do you compete in anything?" She looked up, surprised but not annoyed. "Not anymore," she said with a smile. "Used to do CrossFit competitions, but now I just train for fun." I nodded, impressed. "That explains the intensity. You're dedicated." She shrugged, her smile turning a little shy. "You're not exactly slacking yourself. Are you training for something specific?" I hesitated for a moment before telling her about the tournament. Her eyes lit up when I explained how it was my first big step into the amateur boxing circuit. "That's awesome," she said, her voice genuinely enthusiastic. "Good luck. I'll have to watch for your name." Her encouragement gave me a boost I hadn't expected. For so long, I'd been rebuilding my life in solitude, focusing on my goals without thinking about anyone else. But her words reminded me that maybe it was okay to let someone new in, even if just a little. As the tournament day arrived, I felt a mix of nerves and excitement. The venue was packed with fighters and spectators, the air buzzing with energy. Frank was in my corner, coaching me through warm-ups and giving me the kind of pep talks only he could deliver. "Remember why you're here, Leo," he said as he adjusted my gloves. "This isn't just about winning. It's about proving to yourself that you can take a hit and keep moving forward." When the first match started, the adrenaline kicked in. I was focused, sharp, and ready to give everything I had. The crowd roared as punches flew, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged there, like this was exactly where I was supposed to be. I won my first bout by decision, and the second by TKO in the third round. Each victory felt like another piece of my life clicking into place. By the time the tournament was over, I hadn't taken first place, but I'd made it to the semi-finals, a result I was proud of. Afterward, Frank clapped me on the back. "You did good, kid. Real good. Next time you'll take it all." That night, I went home exhausted but content. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The next time I saw her at the gym, she asked how the tournament went. I told her about making it to the semi-finals, and she smiled, genuinely impressed. "That's incredible," she said. "You must be proud." "I am," I admitted, and for once, I actually felt it. We talked for a little longer that day, just about training and life, but something about the conversation felt different. It wasn't just small talk anymore. It was a connection. Later that night, I found myself smiling as I thought about her. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to take another chance. The next tournament came faster than I expected. Frank had entered me into a more competitive circuit this time, and the stakes were higher. I'd been training relentlessly, spending every spare moment at the gym or running drills in my garage. It wasn't just about proving myself anymore. It was about pushing past every limit I thought I had. Chloe was there for most of it. We'd fallen into a rhythm, talking more after our workouts and even texting outside the gym. She was funny, sharp, and had this way of making me feel like I wasn't just some guy trying to piece his life back together. She made me feel like I was enough, just as I was. When the tournament day finally arrived, I felt ready. Frank gave me a quick pep talk as I laced up my gloves. "This is your night, Leo. You've earned this. Now go out there and take it." The atmosphere was electric. Fighters paced back and forth, psyching themselves up, while the crowd buzzed with anticipation. I glanced around the room and spotted Chloe in the stands, her eyes locked on me. She gave me a thumbs up and mouthed, "You got this." That small moment lit a fire in me. I was fighting for myself, yes, but seeing her there, cheering me on, made me want to give it everything I had. The first few matches were tough, but I powered through. Each win brought me closer to the finals, and each victory felt like another step toward proving that I was no longer the man Belle had left behind. When the final match began, the arena was deafening. My opponent was experienced, taller, with a reach advantage that kept me on my toes. Frank's voice echoed in my head. "Stay close. Keep moving. The first round was a blur of dodges and counters. By the second, I started finding openings, landing shots that made the crowd roar. By the third, I knew I had a chance. I could feel the momentum shifting in my favor, and with a final burst of energy, I landed a clean hook that sent my opponent to the mat. The ref counted, and when the bell rang, I could barely hear the announcer declare me the winner over the crowd's cheers. As my hand was raised in victory, my eyes searched for Chloe. She was on her feet, clapping and cheering louder than anyone else. The look on her face wasn't just pride, it was something more, something that made my chest tighten in the best way. After the match, I was surrounded by congratulations. Frank, other fighters, even strangers from the crowd. But all I could think about was Chloe. I found her near the bleachers, waiting for me with a smile that made the exhaustion melt away. "You were amazing," she said, her voice warm and full of excitement. "Thanks," I replied, my nerves suddenly hitting harder than any punch I'd taken that night. But I think I had a little extra motivation. Her cheeks flushed slightly, and I knew I had to say it now or I'd regret it forever. "Chloe," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "would you want to go out with me sometime? Like, an actual date?" For a moment, she just looked at me, her smile widening. Then, with a playful tilt of her head, she said, "Took you long enough to ask, champ." I laughed, relief flooding through me. "So that's a yes?" "It's a yes," she said, her tone teasing but sweet. The rest of the night felt like a dream. We didn't dive into anything heavy or serious, just talked and laughed like two people who were exactly where they were supposed to be. Chloe wasn't just beautiful, she was kind, funny, and grounded in a way that made me feel safe. She had this way of looking at me like she saw all the bruises and scars and didn't care. To her, I wasn't just someone trying to rebuild, I was someone worth believing in. When I dropped her off that night, she leaned in with a soft smile and said, "Good night, champ. Don't let this win go to your head." I grinned, feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And with Chloe by my side, I couldn't wait to see what came next. Dating Chloe was like stepping into a new chapter of my life, one I didn't even know I was ready for. From our very first date, it was clear she wasn't just someone I liked. She was someone who made me feel alive. We started small, grabbing coffee, walking around the park, sharing stories about our lives. But every moment with her felt effortless, like we'd known each other forever. She had a way of making even the simplest things feel special. Whether we were trying a new restaurant or just sitting in my living room, talking late into the night, I couldn't get enough of her laugh, her smile, the way she lit up a room without even trying. She surprised me, too, in ways I didn't expect. One night, she showed up at the gym to watch me train. "I wanted to see where the magic happens," she said with a grin. Frank teased me about it later, but I didn't care. Seeing her there, supporting what I loved, made me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. For the first time in years, my life didn't feel like a grind. I wasn't just working to survive or pushing myself to prove something. I was living, really living. The sneaker business was thriving, the gym had become my sanctuary, and Chloe was the bright spot that made everything else shine. Every day with her felt like a reminder of how far I'd come. There was a time when I thought I'd never feel happy again, when I believed Belle's betrayal had broken something in me that couldn't be fixed. But Chloe changed that. She reminded me that life could be good, that I could trust again, that I deserved to feel this way. There were still challenges, of course. Starting a new relationship wasn't without its bumps, but with Chloe, it all felt worth it. She was patient with me, understanding when I needed time to work through my doubts. And in return, I made sure she knew how much she meant to me. Whether it was surprising her with her favorite flowers, planning little weekend trips, or just telling her how amazing she was every chance I got. Being with Chloe felt like seventh heaven. My days weren't just about routine anymore. They were filled with purpose, joy, and hope. She wasn't just someone I was dating. She was my partner, my inspiration, the person who made me believe in the future again. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel like I was rebuilding my life. I felt like I was truly living it.